I would like to show you how to set up a simple scene so that you can start doing some lighting tests and some rendering tests. I'm going to start by creating some objects. I will make a polygon primitive plane. This is going to serve as my ground. I should warn you that I am using an older computer, and for me, there are definitely times when I want to pause my render. This is one of them. I don't have any lights in the scene, and I know that nothing's going to show up in the render view for quite some time. So I'll keep the render view open and move it off to the side as I do my basic object setup. I'll make my plane reasonably large so that it can simulate my ground. And then I'm going to create some spheres. I'm going to use NURB spheres because they're a little bit smoother than polyspheres, but if you'd rather use a polygon sphere, go right ahead. And I'll just move it up above the ground. In my previous demonstration I had 3 spheres, so I will go ahead and duplicate my sphere a couple of times. If you want to add a texture to your sphere, the easiest way to do that is in your right-click menu. Under right-click, I am going to go to Assign New Material. And in this class, we are going to be using mostly Arnold shaders. So I'll go to Arnold Shader, and I will assign an AI standard surface. To the AI standard surface, once I've added it, I will be able to see it in the attribute editor. Under base, there is this color attribute. If I click on the black and white checkbox here, that will open up the Create Render Node window. The render node I used previously is the ramp. And to the ramp, if I click on this black circle, that will load the circle into my selected color. This one I will do red to blue. And then over here I will repeat the process. Assign new material, Arnold shaders, AI standard surface, black and white checkbox, ramp. This one I will go blue to green. So there's my scene, there are my spheres, and if I go back to my render view and start my render running again, you will probably be extremely disappointed in what you see, particularly if you're used to the Arnold render view, the Maya render view, I am sorry. The Maya software render will render objects because it uses a thing called a default lighting set. Arnold does not use a default lighting set. Arnold, if there are no lights in your scene, there are no lights in your scene. You will see nothing, just a big black square. That's okay, that's perfectly normal. What I want to do now is I want to start adding lights. You've probably noticed that over in your Create menu, Maya has a number of lights. I'm not going to be using these lights. I will pause and explain them at some point, but for the moment I'm going to be going back over to Arnold and using the Arnold lights. The Arnold lights are much, much smarter than the Maya lights. They do more things, they give you more options. I'm going to start with the basic Arnold light, which is an area light. When I add the area light to the scene, again, you'll be really disappointed because even though there's a light in the scene, it's not going to illuminate anything. Arnold does physical light simulations, which means that the light has a degree of fall-off that is equivalent to what a light would do more or less in the real world. So I'm going to take this light, and you'll see again, my render does nothing. I'm going to angle the light down towards my spheres. If you're completely unused to lighting, you should know that an area light is essentially a plane with a line sticking out of it. The light is being cast in the direction of the line. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, but probably not much. And in my Control-Shift-Right-Click menu, I am going to move my Move tool into object mode so that I can move it along its current axis. My scene is set up properly for lighting at this point. The trick is, of course, that with that real-world lighting, my light simply is not strong enough to affect my spheres. In the Attribute Editor, I can adjust the light's color, intensity, and exposure. Intensity adjusts the strength of the light. If I set this up to 2, maybe I'll see something. I don't. If I set it to 10, maybe I'll see something. I don't. 20, still nothing. You know, it'll help if I start my render running. There's 20, so you can see something, but it's pretty weak. So intensity adjusts the strength of the light. I'm going to set that back to 1 because in Arnold, the thing that I want to do is not adjust the intensity. I want to adjust the exposure. Exposure serves as a multiplier for intensity. Exposure takes 2 to the power that I type in here and then multiplies it by the intensity value. So I want to keep my intensity set to 1 and just adjust my exposure. So if I set my intensity to 2, again, you see nothing. If I set my exposure to 2, you may start to see a little bit right in here. And that's because exposure, like I said, it's 2 to, in this case, the second power times that intensity value. You remember that when I had my intensity set up to 20, I could see things, but it was still really pale. If I set my exposure to 20, it's like a nuclear explosion happened. So remember, I don't want to adjust the intensity. The thing that I want to adjust is the exposure. Let's try that at 5. So my exposure at 5 is similar to my intensity at 20. Let's try maybe an 8. And that looks pretty good for my scene. Depending on how your scene is set up, you may find that you need to use different values in your exposure. The other fun thing with exposure and intensity is color, and the reason these three things are linked together is that if I go into color, this value attribute here also acts as intensity. We'll just say acts as intensity. So if I turn my value down to black, you'll see that my render goes away because now essentially what I've done is I've turned my intensity to 0. And of course, if I turn my value up above 1, if I turn this up to 2, that will cause the light to brighten because essentially what I've done is I've turned my intensity to 2. So just remember that when you're messing around with light color, value is the same thing as intensity. So what I want you to practice with lights is the idea that you can adjust saturation, and a little bit of saturation goes a very long way. You can see now my render is almost completely green. You can adjust the hue of the light, that's its RGB color, but you never want to adjust the value because value is the same as intensity. So that's these first 3 boxes. To them, I will add this one last one. There is a Use Color Temperature button here. When I check Use Color Temperature, I can type in degrees Kelvin, and that will be applied to my render. It defaults to 6500, but if I turn this down it will become redder. So I turned it down to 200, which should be very dark and very red. 2000, a little more orange. 4000, closer to yellow. So you can go through times of day that way. I will pause this video here because at this point I hope that you will be able to set up a scene, add a light, and see something in your render view. In my next video, I will go into some of the more fun light settings. See you soon.